Samech Vav, Half-Pay Kislev, page Tzadik base.
Right, so we're doing the difference between Talmud Yerushalmi and Talmud Bavli.
I'll go to the lunch room.
And we saw that the mile of Talmud Yerushalmi is that it's al derech with the Torah Shebiksav. That's what we call a Chochma Berura. In other words, it's not a Chochma that's Melubish in any Levushim Hamalimim. No, this is Elkus Chochma Selekisa. It's come Lamata, Milmaila Lamata, in an even what the Yoratir is Meir, and it doesn't need any bureau. We pointed out yesterday in the class. And that's the Indian of Torah Shebiksav, the cloud. And in our particular Indian here, it's more the Indian of the Chumash, the Chumash Torah. And we saw that that's already Mavura, and we brought down from the Alter Rebbe in Tanya that the Torah Shebiksav, particularly Mikro, meaning Chumash, well, it means indirectly all the Koftalet Sifrei Tanakh. They are b'madregas Atzilus. What Atzilus is Lamaila from Biro, of any necessity, the cloud of Biro. And we asked the Shara that the whole Aved of Talmud Bavli is to be Mavara, the Indian of the Mikro, so we pointed out wasn't that the Mikro needed Biro, it was only that Mitzad the Mikablim, due to the fact that they are, as we saw in Chutzelads, and also due to the Helen Vehester, Vismana Golas, and as we'll soon see, the Indian of the Levushim, which are caused by the Helen of Chutzelads, particularly, as we brought down in the name of the Gemara, that our sages were Goizer Tuma on the air of Chutzelads. The truth of the matter is that they were also Goizer Tuma on the ground, the earth of Chutzelads, not only on the beer. But the reason we bring the Aviyah, that's a higher and more delicate part, we might have thought that being a delicate, almost intangible entity, though that's not tried to be Goizer Tuma, unless we see that even on the Aviyah of Chutzelads, meaning that if somebody enters the Aviyah of Chutzelads, then certain tumas of mace, tumas mace, affect him, according to the Gezerah of the Chachomim. And therefore, it's like as if he went into a oil, a big tent, where a dead person is. And therefore, if he came back and wanted to enter the Beis Hamikdash, he would need to go through Hazoya and Tevila with all the inyanim which are necessary to enter the Hazoya and the Beis Hamikdash. So therefore, being as it is, that the Neshamas, how they are in Chutzelads, are mishlavish in that levush of Tumah, how it is mitzad the Helem of Chutzelads, that causes that the Mekablim of the Torah are not able to see the tremendous light and the Elokus, how it is in Torah Shebiksav, in the Torah, particularly in the Indian of the Chumash, and therefore there's a necessity to be mafalpo in the different pesukim in the Chumash in order to reach what is the Amos conclusion, beneger to the pesukim of it, not that there's any pesoilas chas v'sholim in the actual pesukim and the actual things which are being darshaned. Well, that's mitzad, as we pointed out, the chisaron of the levushim of the Mekaber. And we saw that in Eretz Yisrael, the levushim are much higher, and they're not so down into the level of Olam HaAsiyah, where the Union of the Klippus have their Iker presence, but they're from the levushim are those of Olam HaYitzira. They only just go through Ma'avar HaAsiyah, but not the Yislavshas. Yeah, therefore, those who were the original Chachomim in Eretz Yisrael, they were able to gain all the inyanim from Torah Shebiksav in a much clearer and higher oifan, and that's the difference we saw between the Talmud Yerushalmi and the Talmud Bavli. V'zeu Maila now in Tzadik Beis, V'zeu Mailas Talmud Yerushalmi al Talmud Bavli, if he should meya bo, the Bechinas HaChochma HaBrura, the already clarified and purified Chochma, like we saw in the Torah Shebiksav. That's meya, a similar level in Talmud Eretz Yisrael. In other words, that's why there's no pilpulim when you get to the Pesukim so much, because Talmud Yerushalmi, as it were, quotes the sources as they are, and says the halachas which are shot to those particular sources. And in Talmud Bavli, there's a whole series of different kashyas back and forth to try and indicate what is the connection with the Pesukim and so on. So we saw that that's the Maila Gedola of Talmud Yerushalmi. Shehila Maila, that's the Indian, the Chochma Bru, Kamay Shehila Maila. It's similar to the Torah Shebiksav. Well, that's the Chochma, how it is Mitzad Elokus in Olam HaAtzilas. Shehila Maila, Shehi Bechinas Gilui Oil Godelna Ma'id. That's a tremendous elevated divine light. We saw that that's the Maila of the Chumash, and the Torah, how it is in the Sefer Torah, Torah Shebiksav, compared to all the other Inyanim in Torah Shebal Peh, but they're also Elokus, but the Levushim under which they were learnt and taught, well, that caused in them a certain necessity for Birah. And therefore we saw that Oyer Godel Me'id that was in Talmud Yerushalmi Eina Be'erach Lagabe Hagilu Shameya Be'Talmud Bavli Yebo Ha'avi Ha'oyer Mustar, because over there in Bavel, being as it was Chutzlot, then the divine light was hidden by the Levushim of Elam HaAsiyah, and particularly even how Elam HaAsiyah is mislavish in the Levushi HaKlippers. So a thing that we find, even though this is not actually written, not in the Medrash, not in the Gemara, but there's certain great, very early codifiers of the different great teachers of Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi, what they say this cloud, they reveal it. So, Kol Rav Mi Bavel V'Chol Rebbe Mi Eretz Yisrael Shenetoisef Yud Dahainu B'Chinas Chochma Shemeir Begilui B'Talmud Yerushalmi. Now we find all out throughout the Gemara, even how it is in Talmud Bavli, some people are referred to, some of the Amoraim are referred to as Rav so and so, and some of them are referred to as Rabbi so and so with Ayud. In the Mishnah, all of them are referred to as Rabbi, because in the Mishnah was drawn up by Rabbeinu HaKodesh, but he was in Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, all the Tanoim, the Chachmei HaMishnah, they're all Rabbi. They all have the term Rabbi, not Rav. But amongst the Amoraim, amongst the Talmudic teachers, then we find some of them referred to as Rav, Ploini, Rav Nachman, for example, and others. They have Rav Yosef, all of the main Amoraim. Some of them just referred by one name. For example, you have Rova. He's not even called Rav somebody, he's just called Rova. And they have Rav himself, and he's just called Rav. Not Rav somebody, but he's called Rav. As well known that he was immediately after Rabbeinu HaKodesh, he was the first generation Mamish, until the point that the Gemara sometimes says about Rav that he has the Madrega Vatan. So, but nonetheless, he's just called Rav, without any other name. So what's the significance? Why is it some people are called Rav and some people are called Rabbi? So come along certain of the great codifiers, so all the Tanoim V'Amoraim, and they say a klal. They say that anybody who is called Rav, then he was only involved. His teachings and his what you might call presence, most of the days of his teaching were in Bavel. Therefore, he's called Rav. Mashenkin, those who were in Eretz Yisrael at the time of the Talmud Yerushalmi, or in the time of the Amoraim, or they were oiler to Eretz Yisrael after having been in Bavel at the beginning, but they came and stayed permanently in Eretz Yisrael, then they're called Rabbi. In other words, those who are shayach to Bavel are Rav, those who are shayach to Eretz Yisrael are called Rabbi, which means that all of those who are really shayach to the teachings of the Gilui of Talmud Bavli, and their permanent state of teaching, or their permanent place of teaching, was in Bavel, so they're called by the name Rav. Those who were, for some reason, Be'ikar in Eretz Yisrael, or they went up to Eretz Yisrael and stayed there, and they continued their main career, as you might say, so they're called Rabbi. So the Rabbi Rashab says, why? He said, it tells you that those who are in Eretz Yisrael, they're called Rabbi with an extra yud. Yeah, the Hainu B'chinas HaChochma Shemeya B'Gilui B'Talmud Yerushalmi. In other words, that yud is indicatory of two idionim. First of all, it's indicatory of Chochma, and being a small ois like an akuda, it's indicative of bittul. And the emes of bittul comes from Chochma, as is one on, and therefore Chochma is called Kochma. So those Chachomim, when they were in Eretz Yisrael, we had the very great Madrega of Eretz Yisrael. We saw earlier that it was Makaber from Olam HaYetzira, and therefore there was a greater bittul to Elakus, was Meya in the teachings, and therefore it wasn't necessary, or the whole pilpul, and therefore those people who taught that teaching were called Rabbi, to indicate the Maila of the Chochma Brura, like we compared it to the Chochma, how it is in the Chumash itself, that it's Meir in that Torah, how it was taught in Eretz Yisrael, and therefore we saw yesterday, in Torah, Keteros Eretz Yisrael, mitzad the Gila, the Chochma, in a very clear and purified level, Chochma Brura. And so for that reason, called Rabbi is Me'eretz Yisrael. Omikol Mokim. Yeah, so that comes out. We have a tremendous mila in Talmud Yerushalmi over Talmud Bavli, and it's not even necessary all the pilpui, because there's Meir there, the Chochma Brura, they already completely purified, not necessary to be purified form of Chochma, how it is in Torah Shabbat, and that's Meir directly into the teachings of the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael, who produced the Talmud Yerushalmi. And so that's therefore they got this mile of being called Rabbi with the whole Arichas. So Kunta, he said there's a big mile in the Jerusalem Talmud compared to the Talmud Bavli, and in the teachers and in everything connected with the pnimius of that teaching, how it's drawn up in Talmud Yerushalmi. So Kunta is that really, if you learned Talmud Yerushalmi and you didn't have any shaykhs to Talmud Bavli, then you would have a mila over the Chachomim Aliyah Tzad Bavel and over Talmud Bavli. So therefore the Rabbi goes back and he says, Mikol Mokim, nonetheless, Yesh Yisron Mila B'Talmud Bavli. Nonetheless, we still remain with our previous principle, that there's a tremendous advantage in the Talmud Bavli. And what is that? Shalidei hayegia bebira kushiyas magir lebchinas helem ha'atzmi de Torah mashe Elokim heivin darako she'ein ze nimshach bebchinas ha'amshocha de Yosha. We saw earlier the Maila Ver Choizer in Talmud Bavli, they're going back no matter la Maila. So he said, despite all the Maila we just stated in Talmud Yerushalmi, there's still how do you call it, a head in the whole competition, as you might call it. There's still a Yisr Maila in Talmud Bavli, mitzad the fact that the Talmud Bavli demands Yegia and struggle in a much more challenging and demanding way than it is in Talmud Yerushalmi. Dafki because of the Maila of Talmud Yerushalmi. And once again, that whole principle of the Yegia leading to a deeper, greater grasp, both in the Etzem Nefesh of the Adam and in the Inif and the Sherish of that in and how it is in Elakus, Lamaila, well, that's gained precisely through the tremendous struggle and the Kashiyas in Talmud Bavli. And even that gives it a Maila over the Chochma Brura of Talmud Yerushalmi. That's what he says, that this is not Nimshach, B'Pchinas HaAmshocha de Yosha. We pointed out already earlier the two movements in the Yosha, no Maila Lamata, or Choizer no Mata Lamaila. Talmud Bavli was in and Aver Chayzer. We saw that the Beklal, we learned Davke Bashkach Protius, in a very Peladik Bashkach Protius, one of the Maimarim we learned just before Rosh Hashanah. We saw the whole advantage of Aver Chayzer. We discussed it at great length. We do come to choose a Maimah, and over there we got the whole Aver Chayzer. And then we come back and we meet up with the Aver Chayzer. It's amazing how to go. Probably if you take the amount of pages that there are in the Sefer, it's not bad going. So, the mile of Talmud Bavli is a Chayzer. The mile of Talmud Yerushalmi, like we saw, was Oyer Yosha. That's the Elakusa, it's Nimshuk Mil Maila Mata, and that's a comparison with Teresh Biksav, but that was given Mil Maila Mata, Bahar Sinai in an even, that it doesn't demand the union of Oyer Chayzer. But the mile of Oyer Chayzer remains adapted by working back Mil Mata La Maila and struggling against the things which are Mailim Mumaster. In this particular case, the Kashiyas, which are mitzad the union of the Helam and the Klippers. Davka, when you break through that and you're Oyer Chayzer, you come to a much greater Hamshocha than that which is Nimshach Alidei Yoshah. And that's the Maila of Talmud Bavli, Ukamoy Atzur. But we also saw this in those Maimarim that we learned over there, at least here we mention it again briefly, like the hard rock, or what you call the flint rock. Shekoichoi b'ligvu, shehu alidei, hakoa davke. K'moi kein alidei hayigia davke, b'ribui kushis be'elem achahem, b'pchinas oyer choizer, mamata l'mayla, alidei zeh mavarer kol sigei apeselas, magir l'pchinas helem o atzmi, shemishom yoer oyer omuk upnimi yoiser. So once again, the mashal, it's well known, of the tzur hachalomish. It's called the flint stone. And there are different ways of creating fire. One is if you already got fire, if you already have a flame, then you light it up. You light up from another flame to another flame. And then there are different ways that you can produce a flame. There are different ways you can come to it. But the tzura chalomish, the way you produce in the flintstone, the way you produce a spark, which can later be used to cause fire, is by hitting you smite the flintstone. In other words, a drastic and tremendously unusually heavy approach that you actually have to smite the stone with another heavy stone or another heavy metal, which irritates, or how do you call it, frictionizes the tzura chalomish very heavily, and that produces a spark. So that inu hakoa, hitting, is a dor she'ein lezeh erech. It's a inin which you don't. It's not a seder masuda. It's not something which indicates ordinary approach to something. No, it's a inin for a drastic amshocha or drastic pu'ula, but that causes something to come shaloi be'erech. In other words, it's not connected with an ordered system of ideas which have led up to that. No, dafki alidei hakoa, then you get the splint, or the spark comes out of the stone. So the Rebbe compares that to the effort and the asking of kashas back and forth in the Inyan and Talmud Bavli, that yagir back and forth with the ribui hakashi is, well, that's like hitting and smiting the flintstone. But you notice that he says the expression that the tzur, the flintstone, is koichoi, is bligvu, and that comes dafke through a hakoa. Now, what do you mean by saying that the flintstone is bligvu? What is the implication? What's the implication? After all, it's just a stone. What do you mean by saying that the flintstone is bligvu? So what we mean is that as long as you have a flintstone and you hit him, then you'll always get fire. It's not right to say that once you've used the flintstone a few times, you've got a fire out of it, and you've taken all the fire out of the flintstone. For example, if you have another source of fire and you keep burning it, then it's eventually going to burn away, and what you're using will also eventually burn away. In other words, another fire eventually burns out. So if your source of fire is from another fire, or even from a fuel instrument which produces fire, but the fuel is only limited and finite as to how much you can have. But a flintstone it will forever and ever, it'll always produce. If you hit it, it'll always produce you a. So now we say that the helem of the ash in the flintstone is called bligvul. In other words, that the drastic activity of hitting the flintstone leads me to a makor pnimi, which is l'mayla mi medida v'agbala. It's l'mayla migvul. And so that's the mashal for the avodah in Talmud Bavli, the striving and the yigiyah and the tremendous work back and forth with the kashi is, well, it's like smiting the flintstone, and that causes a bligvul tika aish, which is ein arech, higher in the sense that it's bligvul, and also it's a higher and deeper form of fire. That's what he says now. The dafki through that, as we saw, we got rid of all the siegs, all the small impurities and the pseilas, and we came into the helem atzmi, to the Indian of Torah, how it's connected with Alakus Mamish Beatzmas Eitzev, and there's Oya Omoku Pnimi Yosa. Al Derek Luchas Harishainas Veluchas Shniyai. Well, that's the same difference as the Indian of Luchas Harishainas and Luchas Shniyai. Did I miss out on something? No, I didn't. Among it, says the Rebbe, at the Indian of Talmud Bavli, despite the mile of Talmud Yerushalmi, despite the tremendous elevation that Talmud Yerushalmi has, nonetheless there still remains a supremacy for Talmud Bavli. And even though Talmud Bavli is not Chokmah Brura like Talmud Yerushalmi, it's not everything purified and ready like the Torah Shabbat, and you have to go through all this, but precisely through all that arena the Kushi is, and that's the union of Oya Choizer. After through that, you come into the Helem Atzmi, meaning the union of the Koyach within Elakus, how he is, Mamish Miyuchet B'atzmusei, to purify and take out all the Paselas and be made the Oyer Amiti of Torah. Like we saw, that there were two inyanim, that first of all, through the river Yagi, you come back to a Helem, which is a Helem of Chochmah, the union from Chochmah, how it is in Pnimis V'Atzmis HaNefesh by the Adam, or Chochmah Stimoah, how it is Lamaila. And then we saw an even deeper, more profound inyan, that we rid the Etzem Hasogas of Torah, of any soils that might be there, mitzad the fact that they're in Olam Hazeh Alamata, or, as we'll soon see, mitzad certain lavushim, either of Chutzaloretz, or of the Klippas Neger, or Klippas in general, which have entered in some very delicate way the musogim of the Torah, and through that tremendous effort we purify and we bring to a ha'ora of the Oyer ha'emes, like we saw, and that's another and second Indian that comes to the Yigiyah, bringing you mamish to Pnimis V'Atzmus, see, and that's the Maila of the Luchas Achreines or Shniyais compared to the Luchas Rishenim. We said the Luchas Rishenim were just a straight Gilev Alakus Oyer Yosha, and the Luchas Achreines, their inyan was Dafki Alidei Tshuva, Me'umcha Deliba, and etc. etc. That's the union of Oyer Choizer. Now we'll be able to understand what we began the Maimah with. That we started off with the famous statement that Moshe Rabbeinu, by hitting the rock instead of talking to it, he caused the Yerida in Torah. Whatever we need, a struggle in Torah, we have to work hard for every gilui of every detail of the halachas. Well, that was what was brought into the world through the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu hit the seller instead of speaking to her. מכל מוקים, על ידי זה דווקא יש יסרון מיילו שמגיעים לבחינס אמיתיס אור התורה ממש, כמוי שהיא בבחינס הלם או עצמי ממש של המיילה, גם מבחינס הלם או עצמי דחוכמה. So here we see that this is a famous principle, and considers that always there's two sides to the coin. Mitzad echad we have a hina for the Yerida, but after al yidei that Yerida as the famous principle has it, you read a Tzeirecha Aliyah, like the Gemara in Masechta Machas, that Dafki, in what appears to be a drastic Yerida, we find that Dafki through that there's a tremendous Aliyah, which couldn't have been achieved had it not been the Yerida. Emes, when Moshe Rabbeinu hit the stone and he didn't speak to it, that was a Yerida, and that caused a Yerida in the Klolos Inyan of Torah, similar to the difference between Luchas Deit and Luchas Rishainais. But nonetheless, Dafki through that, the mensch, after struggling with the Yerida that was caused and the results of it, which we'll soon discuss in a second, Dafki Ali did that, he goes back through Oel Chayzer into a much higher light that wouldn't have been Shaykh if the Torah had been just left in the form of Chokmah Brura, the way of giving no Milo. And that's what he says, that the Indian of the Hakoah brought the Torah into a Yerida B'toik Levushim. Now it's very important, this statement here, because we're now going to see in the Maskana, the whole Maimon, the Maskana, the whole Indian, that the Rebbe is going to say that all of these Yonin that we've been talking about in Chutzlot, when we're saying that the Talmud Bible is Mislavish in Klippas Neiga, and like we saw earlier, that even in the highest Musogim, there's a little trace of how do you call it, impurity, which needs to be brought out, and needs to be purified, and all those in Yonim. We're now going to see that the Ikea concept of that is what we call Levushim. So Rebbe begins that whole new explanation by saying that when Moshe Rabbeinu hit the stone, instead of speaking, then the Torah went down, then he slabsho b'levushim, and it entered into literally garments, shetzrichim yegia rabba levara es levushim. The whole yegia is literally to purify, or in some way clarify, for those levushim. And Ali Dade, the Yigiyah, and the purpose of the Yigiyah is to go through these Levushim, or literally purify them, and through that, to come to the Helam HaAtzmi in Chokhmah. So now, Lafisa, you have to be mispointed, what would he mean by saying Levushim? What are the types? What do I learn by now? Because this is like the Maskana. We brought this kasha right at the beginning of mine. Now we're like summing up on the basis of everything we've said in the meantime, how that fits. So that means we've reached like what we might call close to the rounding up of the whole argument, at least up to this point. So the whole time we've been saying that there's a necessary year, first of all, that you reach a deeper level in the Etzem understanding. Then we've been saying that you purify the actual Asoga from very delicate forms of waste material that are in the Asoga. And now we see that Chutzalot has got certain inyanim which affect the way Torah is to be understood. And Eretz Yisrael, all these inyanim, says the Rebbe, can be described as levushim. Now, what's the maila of a levush? What's first of all what you might call the maila of a levush legabi inyaneno? Legabi this inyan, or what you might call the chisaron of a levush. A levush is something that is not the etzem of the thing. Your shirt or your suit or whatever it is you wear is not you. It's not your etzem. However, on the other hand, when you put it on, it affects your etzem in a very real way. First of all, it causes you to be warm or to be protected and so on and so forth. But also your levushim have an effect on you. The type of levushim that you wear, it's brought down and says, why is it by sitting we're careful to go in certain types of levushim? For example, why is it we don't go in Mivtoim Tafki in levushim Mesuyomim? Because whether you want it or not, the levushim have an effect on you. And if you wear, sort of sticker type levushim, not proper levushim, then that has an effect on it. That makes it, your whole way of functioning becomes like that. In other words, if you dress up in a super informal type of dress, then you don't feel bound to certain things. There's a certain type of precursor flows through the mind of a person. He said, well, I'm not, I'm just like everybody, so I can just do what I want. Whereas when you're dressed up and you've got a suit and a hat and the whole thing, then there's a certain control over your whole being takes place. And that's why in the suit kufa, it's got to be a Chassidish suit. And in the hat kufa, it's not a cowboy hat or a chayshut, it's a Siddish hat. In other words, that the levushim have an effect on us both negatively and positively. However, the type of effect they have on us is not going to get to a very etzem. If you persuade the person to put on the levushim in a very short time, whatever he didn't do right with the levushim, he can correct. And it's not something which is his whole etzem has become stained by those levushim, unless he wears them for a heck of a long time, and he goes with them into the wrong places, and he does with them very serious things on him. Then they might leave a lasting effect. The type of effect that the levushim have are alterable, just like the levushes. You can put it on, take it off. In the same way, the type of effect that the levush has on you, also ultimately it can be removed, just like it was put on. So therefore, the Rebbe is now machadish a new idea, and he says, what do we mean by saying that the Torah went down into Klippus? No, the Torah went down into Bovo, but how do you read it into Chutzalot? But the Avi of Chutzalot is, you have to be careful, I might let you have something. So that wouldn't be nice, would it? If you go to the class in the Shechita and you keep awake, and you got to keep awake in this class. Alright? That's all part of the same story. And if there's any hope in the world that you'll be an Eilach Sheikha, I don't know if you're going to be a Sheikha Peklav. It's only because of this. Is the inyan of a lavush is something that. So the Rebbe is machadish that all those inyanim we said, and even to the delicacy that we said that they can be deep inside a very profound inyan into certain waste material, certain things that need to be purified out. Well, that's all in the form of a lavush. It's not the be'etzem chashush. The Torah became affected by the klippus. I feel the klippus noiga. But there's like a certain, how do you call it, once you put on that lavush, unless you take action to make sure it won't affect you, then there's a certain interaction between the lavush and you, and that can, as they say in Yiddish, zukleppen zach. Zukleppen means like it sticks onto you. It becomes part of you, but it's only a stuck-on part of you. It's not something that's really shy to your very etzem of your essence. And therefore, we're careful to call those things inside the Hasogi of Torah sigim. They're like little things that are there. They're not really that the etzem, how do you call it, silver is mamish pagum. The silver is great. It's just that there's a little unfortunate things that need to be removed. And I mean, all those inyanim are called levushim. Therefore, that what Moshe Rabbeinu caused a yerida, HaKodesh to heaven, wasn't a yerida chas v'shalom be'etzem ha'Torah. Because like we saw, the Torah, the way it's given milmaila, it's all betachas ha'kamuv u'poshet, it's betachas ha'bira, betachas purity with all those inyanim. What is needed is that the levushim need to be shaken out and purified. Well, you say, well, maybe just throw away all the levushim. Who needs levushim? Well, that's because we're down here in this world, and we're in the Olam Asiyah, so there do need to be levushim on the Torah. It's not exactly the same Torah the way it is in Neid Noelian. It's Torah how it is down there. It needs the levushim. But the levushim to be clean and purified levushim. For the sake of the mensch down here, we have to purify them of any trace, but it's only a necessity of purification. So, just like we see that if a baguette is dusty or something, what do? You thwack it, or you put it into a washing machine, it shuffles itself away, hopefully not too much. If the washing machine's a modern one, it doesn't shuffle too much. And it jumps and shuffles all over the place. And the soap and all that, and that's what cleans out, and then the levush comes out, hopefully, nochi v'zach, betachlis. Well, that's what we see here. There's a whole new inyan now. The Rebbe is going to describe and sum up all these inyanim be'ika as levushim. And I remember the Eibishter Kaviyachol also, when he went into Golos with the Yidden, and the Torah went with the Eibishter and the Yidden into Golos, that literally the Eibishter put on these levushim himself, as where he allowed these somewhat stained levushim to be made upon him, and we have to, as it were, purify these levushim, and then we get both to the Torah and to the Eibishter. He's united with the Torah, that we reach in a very high and purified way the emissary iskashas in the oil of the Torah, and in the shores within our own nefashis of the etzem ishkashus of a yid with Torah. And so that's the whole sort of new nuance which is occurring now. What follows is there's a big mile in the Indian of having to work with these levushim, even though they're a yerida, even though it was a yerida that the Torah went into these type of levushim, and the Eivisha Kaviyach entered these levushim of Alidei. What we work to purify them and to, as it were, remove the stains from those levushim, then we come to a tremendous new union, both with the Eivisha and with the Torah. So if that's the case, then you can't beat Talmud Bavli. There's no way you can beat it. Every time you'll turn the pancake, you keep coming back to this unbelievable Mila in Talmud Bavli. So, that's going to present the Kashya, what everybody remembers, the Kashya. There's an old saying that a Siddur Bocher can at least remember a Gemara from having learned in a Maimach Siddur. If he doesn't remember the Gemara, it's the way it is. If you remember, in the second Maimah of the Hemshech, then we bought the famous Gemara where it's written the Rab Zera, but he was one of these, in Bava he was called Rab Zera. When he came up there, so according to the Kislev we just mentioned, he became later called Rabbi Zera, because he was in Eretz Yisrael. What's written in the Gemara over there, that when Rab Zera left Bava, when he came up to Eretz Yisrael, what did he do? Anybody remember? Very nice. Oh, somebody remembers. Yeah. When he came up to learn, and he knew he was going to learn Talmud Yerushalmi, what did he do? He fasted either 40 or 100 tiny years. It's put down in the Gemara, it's written mem, there's sort of a little stroke over the top of it, so it's not clear what it means, 40, or maybe mem's an abbreviation for mayor. And the Rebbe brings mayor, so it seems that our Rebbeim, they learned the Gilus in the Gemara as mayor. So he fasted for 100 tiny years. Is there what for? To forget Talmud Bavli in order that you should be able to learn Talmud Yerushalmi. So the Rebbe is going to ask the Kasha, we should do this. We've just been saying that there's nothing greater. If you already had Talmud Bavli, like Rab Zera had Talmud Bavli, then what was he doing? He fasted to get rid of when he came into Eretz. Well, he should have said, oh yeah, now I'm going to learn Talmud Bavli. I'll put that in my pocket to get rid of my Talmud Bavli. You know, where was take a fast? Well, not to stand, but Meya Tanisa. So that's the kasha that we now begin with. So says the Rebbe, Al Pianal Tzorik Lovin, Masha Rab Zera Tzom Meya Tanisa, Bifdei Lishkach, that he should forget Talmud Bavli, Me'agash Talmud Bavli, Hu B'madreya Gavoya Kol Kach. In other words, that it always, despite the mile of Talmud Yerushalmi, Talmud Bavli beats it. So I would have thought somebody would roll off their chair from the greatness of the Kashya. Particularly that earlier we already spoke about this Barigas in that Maimah over there in Shuvah Yisrael, in the Tzaita Maimah in the Hemshech. There's a whole piece over there about it. Well, it's my time. I'm supposed to remember back to the beginning of the Hemshech, what they want of me. But anyway, whatever. It's a pelgatika kasha. It's an amazing kasha. We couldn't. Because everybody learns in Pashtas that Talmud Yerushalmi is much higher than Talmud Bavli. They're right. There's a mile in Talmud Yerushalmi. Oh, but that's only the Yosha Shabbat. We have to see. So Reb Zera for sure knew, and we're going to see later that he was really an Erechoizadike of Zera in his form of Avodah. He for sure knew the mile of Talmud Bavli. Why did he fast?
This is in Pirkei Avos. If somebody purposely tries to forget their Torah,
yeah. Oh, that's a very good shot. Yeah, very good. If he purposely sits down and forgets his Torah, you don't even want to say. So the answer is a very good question. I think if you were to listen to the tape, but over there we pointed out it was a beer. Not Chas v'Sholom to say that Rab Zera wanted to forget what he'd learned in Talmud Bavli. Cholilu v'chas. That's not allowed to do. He's allowed to forget one prat deliberately. In other words, Rab Zera didn't want to forget all that he'd learned in Talmud Bavli. What he wanted was forget the way of learning, forget that oiven, and to come into the whole new oiven of learning Talmud. Even if we learn in Pashtas, the Talmud Yerushalmi is a much higher a much higher inyan, and it's a much higher, therefore he wanted to go from that lower form of learning into a much higher form of gilel akus in the learning. But if we learn that that's only in one, or even up in tifer and more emiskira, there's an unbelievable mile in Talmud Bavli. And what was he doing? The difficult binyan there to forget the afakir. The whole oifen of the learning is the trick in Talmud Bavli. That's the whole trick. And remember, that's up to Shaila. We should take a vote, say that. So we're going to do a very cruel thing now. I'm going to leave you with the guys with the kashi. Based on what I heard from a Mendel said on numerous occasions, that it's a very good thing to stop and go, say Krishma Shalmita and go to sleep with a kashi. He said, don't answer terrors. You answer terrors the next day. He said, if you sleep with a kasha, then you don't sleep so deeply. That's just bothering you. You don't slough iron, so deep. And he said, that's right. He said, maybe they might send you terrors during the night. If you're very elegant and you really mean L'Shem Shemayim, maybe they'll send you terrors during the night. Yeah, but it's a matter to go shlofing with the kasha. So, you guys are not going sloughing yet. At least I don't think so. But I'll leave you with Kasha. In a minute, although since you should already be able to feel the terror. Since we said that these things are just levushim, then Reb Zera wanted to get out of that type of levush. He didn't want to be in a levush, which still needed purification. Even though he had all the milas that had already been in that he wanted to drop the whole idea of being in those type of